Jaron Jarvis Channel, Top 20 Scary Stories of the Day from Reddit nosleep. 2018, 09, 18. Story 1, I love him still. When I met Noah, I was young enough to still believe that boys like him could love girls like me. I know better now. But I love him still. I was born what my mama called ugly and my grandma called angel-kissed. A birthmark spread purple across my left cheekbone and around my eye, like some unknown continent marked out on a map. Apart from this stain that left me mirror-shy and friendless in middle school, there was nothing else much to me. I grew up in a town named Grace, as unremarkable as I was, fatherless but otherwise content. Grace was the kind of place nobody left, not because they wanted to stay but because they couldn't dream up anywhere better. Grass came up brown, sun stealing any color from the landscape. Our cows were the color of dirt, docile and slow like most of the people that lived in the clapboard houses handed down from their fathers' fathers. Our flowers were pale, any that grew bright quickly died in the heat. Bright things didn't survive long out here in the sun-scrubbed fields and stunted mountains. But Noah was different. I met Noah on prom night. But I'd grown up alongside him for the past 10 years. He just never noticed me. A life lived in the background of other people's stories. Half the girls in school had his name carved into their desks, or even their wrists like Mandy Jacobs had in freshman year, blood mixed with love. People were drawn to him, girls and boys alike, wanting to be closer to the way he burned, closer to the noise and chaos and light he dragged around with him. Nothing about Noah was dull like the dead-end roads and long-lashed cattle. He drove too fast, drank too much, surrounded by boys that liked to run like wolves, girls who climbed out of their bedroom windows to join them out in the trees. But he was kind too, had a smile like rain parting the clouds, laughed easily with his back teeth showing. I'd spent high school dancing alone in my room with the radio turned down low so only I could hear it, feet familiar on the floorboards, never once asked to a homecoming or a party. But for prom my mama was adamant I went. She had been prom queen back in the day. My dad had borrowed his daddy's car, brought her white roses and all. She was under no delusions I'd be the same, but she was forcing me to go nevertheless. She even gave me her old dress to wear. Grandma had altered it for me, hands patient on her sewing machine, making a space in the world for me to belong, if only for the night. I'd held my hand in front of the left side of my face when I looked in the mirror, teeth pulling at the dead skin on my bottom lip. I looked almost pretty, hair falling delicate around my neck. Grandma slapped my hand down, shaking her head. "You look beautiful, Callie. My angel girl." She kissed me between the eyes, her smile lines curving around her temples, each one a reminder of a life well lived. Tally marks of happiness. Then Mama had called me into her bedroom. My mother's bedroom was a place I was rarely allowed. It seemed a place I could never fit into, like walking through a church or a museum, a quiet place left behind by time. A chipped cat figurine sat beside a stack of lilac-wrapped romance novels, spines cracked from too many reads. The bottles of perfume on the vanity were all near emptiness. Pretty things didn't remain long in our house. A single photo was on the bedside table. It was of Mama and me when I was about 5, bad side of my face turned from the camera. Just the way she liked it. She slept alone in her wedding bed and I wondered if sometimes in the early mornings when the sky was soft, she would wake up reaching for the other side before she remembered my daddy had been gone years, her hands still forgetting in the dark. Mama had patted the bed next to her. I wondered if she saw any of herself in me as I sat in the prom dress she had worn the night I was put inside of her by my daddy. I wondered if she wanted to. She'd gripped my jaw in her hand, turning it to the right where my skin was clean and smooth. The half of me she loved. She'd run a thumb down my cheek, shaking her head and sighing, before she jerked my face to the left, brow creasing as she looked at the purple stain, like a drink spilled, another careless mistake just like I'd been when my parents were 18. Wordless she had crossed to her dresser and handed me a bottle of foundation. I'd sat in front of the mirror, refusing to meet my own gaze. Her hands rested either side of my shoulders, nails digging in. My skin was the same on either side, her endless disappointment now hidden deep beneath the makeup. "You're still plain as anything, honey, but at least it ain't plain ugly now." She smiled and squeezed my shoulder. Her mouth softened for a moment. "Brings out the blue in your eyes, just like mine." The night was almost over. I'd spent my night with my back pressed against the bricks of the gym, the only still body in the room as everyone danced, shoulders bared to the strings of lights stretching from wall to wall, stars brought inside. I read once that when you dance with someone else, your heartbeats match up, making body music, beating to time. My heart stuttered alone in my chest. I pushed my spine from the wall when I couldn't take it anymore, ready to drive myself home. Noah caught me with his shoulder as I made my way out. He pressed his hand on my shoulder blade, an apology of skin, his palm warm. He tilted his head to one side as he looked at me. "Don't I know you?" he asked, and I laughed at that. Of course. I felt like I'd known him all my life and he didn't even recognize me. "It's Callie, right?" He grinned, lopsided and beautiful, front tooth chipped. I nodded, wide-eyed in his gaze. "I remember you now, you were the one that picked me flowers when my mama died." I struggled to breathe, lungs forgetting themselves for a moment. Memory seeped in, and suddenly we were 7 years old again, Noah with band-aids on his knees, crying in the long grass round the back of the art classroom. Sitting back to back in dirt, my hands small and nail-bitten, handing him daisies. Something pretty for the pain. His eyes narrowed and he reached for my face, too quick for me to stop him. I could feel his pulse in his thumb, and my heart slowed, keeping perfect pace with the blood in his body. He dragged a finger down my cheek, purple blooming through like wildflowers. "You can try to bury them, but they always grow back eventually." I knocked his hands away, tears blurring the mess of my face, covering my unloved side. "Why are you wearing all that shit on your face, Callie?" he asked. I looked down, lost, still reeling that he even knew my name, the two of us still in the middle of the dancers as they swayed, hip flasks and bruises passing between lips, girls with flowers in their hair and boys in their one-night-only suits. He pulled my hand from my cheek, replacing it with his own. "But on the right side of my face, leaving the mark to the soft haze of the lights. You're beautiful. Just like this." He said the same thing later in the back seat of his car, my mother's dress down around my waist, hands in his hair, night air rolling through the open windows. And he said the same thing again when we woke up together in the mornings that came after, sleep-drenched and warm, sheets tangled, his hand resting on my right cheekbone. And that was it for me. I was gone. Love comes slow, they say, but for me, that was it. I loved him from the moment his shoulder met mine in the half-dark, from the moment my stupid heart started running to keep up. That was loving Noah, always running to keep up, breathless and terrified of being left behind. But he never did. Within a year, we had moved into a trailer in the park he'd grown up in. I'd never been happier. He'd bring me 7-Eleven flowers on his way home from work, bright and smelling of gasoline. We would dance barefoot together in our bedroom, radio turned down low and just for us. We'd take night drives until the dead grass and flat houses were far behind, until Grace was far behind and the trees turned green and the sun came out, turning everything to pink and gold. Noah got restless a lot. Sometimes I would wake up in the blue mornings and feel like my mother, reaching in the dark for someone no longer there. But he always came back to me. We were so happy that first year. I had a job cleaning houses in the gated community up in the hills, half an hour from town, and Noah worked odd jobs when he could be bothered. He would get so bored he'd quit after a few weeks and have to find something new. But that was Noah and I loved him for it. Everything around him would burn out, but never Noah. He worked pumping gas, night shifts at the bar, endless construction jobs, even a bouncer at the strip club for a week until he got fired for turning up drunk. I didn't care though, we always managed to get by, and he drove me to work every morning, singing along to Nirvana or whatever else he'd have blasting from his speakers, making me laugh until my head spun and my stomach ached. The first girl was at the start of our second spring together, when the swallows started to come home, no longer afraid of the cold. She was called Nicole. She had blonde hair like honey dripping down her collarbones, skin clean as milk. I'd watched him eyeing her up for weeks, eyes straying to follow her when we'd see her around town in her cut-offs, or at the bar in Grace drinking a Jack and Coke, or in Walmart buying shampoo. I watched the way she eyed him back, hip bones taut against her waistband, eyebrow raised at our hands held together. She was beautiful. Like Noah, I carried my jealousy for days in the pit of my stomach, cradling it, feeding it, imagining the worst. It left me sleepless and sad, my heart hurting to the point where I started smoking just so I'd have something to do with my hands, endlessly nervous. When I walked in on them in our bedroom on a Sunday, in the bed we slept in, I cried for hours afterwards, locking myself in the bathroom. Noah talked me down though. He always could. He held my face in his hands, said he was sorry, said it wouldn't happen again, that she was gone now and wouldn't be coming back. I spat at him, said I would make sure of it. For the first time since my mama told me if I left I couldn't come back, terrified of watching me repeat her mistakes. I wished I could go home. Summer passed us by, days sunlit and slow. Noah held down a job for 3 whole months, took me to the movies, every week, shoulders pressed together in the dark, eyes lit up by the silver screen. Flowers filled the kitchen to the point where I had to stop him buying more. I laughed at that, sitting up on his lap on one of the lawn chairs outside, watching the stars crawl out of the black. He even drove us all the way to the ocean, saving gas for weeks. We stood hand in hand in the waves, and I felt like the tide was pulling us back together. It didn't last. The second girl was called Irene. Blonde and tan and sun-drenched, white teeth that caught the light when she laughed like Noah's did. I found them together in his truck and I screamed until I hit the dirt, head in my hands. Noah promised me he'd stop, this time he meant it. I slept at my grandma's after it was over. She held me while I cried, hands gentle and smoothing the tangles from my hair. She didn't ask me what had happened but said sometimes people never change, it's the way they grow and it remains, bone deep in their blood. They want to change, but they can't. I knew how that felt. I watched the moon trace patterns like lace through the blinds across the ceiling and ignored when Noah called. He turned up after 3 days with white roses. If my mama could have seen me now. He went home, and I followed. That was loving Noah, always terrified of being left behind. By the time the new year came, snow washing the grey mountains in the distance something clean, I'd forgiven him. But I knew it wouldn't last. As the days got lighter, I'd catch him watching the girl that lived in one of the houses I cleaned when she opened the door for me, Cynthia. He'd wave from the truck as he drove off and my heart would curl up and die in my chest. Those were my hands, ones that held me together, the ones that touched the unloved parts of me, and now he was using them for her. I got home that night and I told him that if he didn't stay away from her it would end up exactly like last time, and he knew what I would do. He promised. He kissed me in the TV glow, thumbs fitting to the base of my throat. He lied. But I still loved him. I walked in on them a week later and was too hollow to cry this time. After, I washed the blood from my hands into the kitchen sink, Noah pressing a single kiss between my shoulder blades, nothing left to say between us. By this time, the missing posters for Nicole had long washed away in the spring rains, and Irene's family still thought she had moved back to Chicago. I wondered how long it would take the search for Cynthia to begin. Noah held me as I cried on the new sheets we'd gone out and bought from Walmart that evening, old ones too blood-soaked to do anything but burn them. We watched the bonfire, hand in hand. I tipped my head back, watching the sparks struggle for the sky, wishing I could leave with them. The girls kept coming. He couldn't help himself. They were beautiful and I was not. They were bright, just like him, couldn't stay away from the way he burned either. The months passed, all that blood mixed with love. I grew numb to it, but could never stop the anger and the jealousy and the sadness. It consumed me. I grew used to washing the blood from the walls of the trailer, to laying my anger to sleep in the pit of my stomach until the next time, until the next girl. I'd count the mornings I woke up alone, wondering how I had become this. I no longer hid the mark on the left side of my face when I looked in the mirror, was glad the ugly showed, a warning sign to the world. It was spring again. The rains had come late this year, leaving the dirt cracked and the air heavy. And I'd seen the way Noah had been looking at Jenny, the girl who lived next door. She was only 17. The same age I'd been when I first met him. Before I'd become this terrible thing, letting the darkest places in our lives swallow me whole. But Jenny was different. She was sweet and she was kind. She loved animals, doted on her little brothers. Sometimes she would come sit with me in the lawn chairs out front and I'd let her smoke my menthols and we'd talk until the street lights came on. I didn't want Jenny to get hurt, didn't want her to end up like those other girls. But I saw the way Noah's eyes would follow her when she walked past our windows. I tried to warn her, for my own sake as much as hers. I yelled, told her to stay away from Noah or there would be trouble. But that evening I walked in on them in our bed. The tears came, like that first time. I tried to tell her, it wasn't my fault. You promised Noah. You promised. My voice was dull in the silence of the room, Jenny's dying breaths the only other sound as Noah pulled his hunting knife from her stomach, parting the soft skin like a deer belly. Out of all the girls he'd killed, she'd been the youngest. He held my face in his hands, blood spreading across my right cheek. I looked over his shoulder to the mirror. Both sides of my face marked out, one by an angel and one by the devil. I'm sorry, he said, taking my hands in his bloody ones. I'd have to wash them clean now, but I knew that stains like this never really come out, you carry them with you wherever you go. You can try to bury them but they always grow back. A warning to the world that goes unseen. The real ugliness is the one we make ourselves. Two shoulders meeting in the dark. Two hearts keeping time. The worst part for me wasn't the blood, and the lying, and the fear. It wasn't knowing where the bodies were buried. It was the way he always chose them over me. The way I was never enough for him. Never beautiful enough, or bright enough. Always second choice, always second best. But I love him still. ... Story 2, a strange broadcast on April 9, 1995. On April 9, 1995, a strange broadcast was played on several local television stations in several small counties in the United States. All of the channels were children's programming channels set up by locals in the area. When questioned afterwards, the owners of these channels reported never airing the broadcast, or even knowing of its existence. The following is based off of witness reports from Berkeley, South Carolina, a county confirmed to have aired the broadcast. At 5:30 p.m., the channel Kids TV Berkeley was set to air an episode of the popular children's show Rugrats. After commercials, the strange broadcast aired. The first 3 minutes were described as white noise and something resembling music. Then, for 30 seconds, white text on a black background read "Who are you?" in all capital letters, followed by another 2 minutes of noise. A spectrogram reading from a VHS copy of the broadcast revealed the noise to be a mess of words, letters and numbers. The words unknown and unknowable are repeated 20 times throughout the broadcast. After the noise concluded, a white screen with black text read "You don't exist" for 5 minutes, after which the broadcast concluded and the episode of Rugrats resumed where it would have left off. Reports of joint pain and a strange feeling in the gut area were reported in counties where the broadcast was aired for around 1 month after the broadcast. 2 years after the broadcast was aired, missing children were reported in the areas the broadcast was aired. Homes with missing children reported no signs of being broken into. Strangely, all television sets in the homes ceased to work. 169 children in total disappeared. On March 10, 2003, a teenage boy appeared in a town in Berkeley, screaming about how he didn't exist and an evil creature known as him. Around 20 minutes after appearing, he disappeared without a trace. Security cameras in the area showed him vanishing into thin air. Police investigation showed the security footage was not tampered with in any way. The police, thinking this was linked to the broadcast 8 years earlier, reopened the case. All 6 officers assigned to the case disappeared within 2 weeks of the case being reopened. Pictures recovered from one of the officer's cameras showed a picture of a small concrete building with an iron door, with a television antenna sticking out of the roof of the building. A strange black entity was seen in the background. As of the time of me writing this, I've tracked down the building in the photograph. The inside is pretty drab, with a metal cot on the right side of the room, and a desk with an old Apple computer on the side adjacent to the door. I booted up the computer and found a file titled gone.avi. Sure enough, it matched the description of the broadcast. This time, however, I noticed a detail not present in any of the reports. A small 175 was present below the words "You don't exist" in the final shot. Upon noticing this, I heard the old metal door of the building screech open. I don't have much time to write this last part. I'm stuck in a dark void, surrounded by children's screams. He is watching me. He knows I'm writing this. Please, if you're reading this, please God help me. The metal building where the broadcast was played from is behind that old factory in Berkeley. Please come join me, it gets very lonely sometimes. Story 3, it's our honeymoon, and my wife isn't acting like herself. I jerked awake in a deluge of water, gasping for air as my eyes opened. I couldn't see for a minute as my vision adjusted to the blinding light beating down. Things cleared and I saw waves beating against the shore, but most importantly, I saw my nephew standing over me holding a now empty bucket. "Come play, Aunt Ruby, you can sleep later." Jake shrieked happily before toddling off to Amelia, who waved at me with an innocent grin that meant she had absolutely put him up to it. I groaned and stood to walk the few feet over to where they were trying to turn a mound of sand into a vague castle shape. "You're a terrible wife, Ames," I fake grumbled, sitting down and nudging her with a smile. "I'm an amazing wife," she countered with a grin. "Especially because I planned the best honeymoon ever." "Hey," I helped. I hadn't. But that was all right. Amy lived for plans and spreadsheets and haggling with airlines and all that fun stuff. We were staying with my brother in Hawaii for the first few days, thus my nephew and his beach adventures, before setting off on a grand tour of the world. I'm still not sure how we had afforded it all on the salaries of a writer and teacher, but like I said, my wife was great at planning. I know I'm talking about her a lot, but I just can't get over being able to say my wife. It was 3 days ago and it still hasn't set in. My wife, my wife, my wife, Amelia Jean Moore. "You didn't," Amy laughed, snapping me out of my, admittedly sappy, thoughts. "But it's okay, I still love you." "I love you more, Moore," I said with what I'm sure was a big, love-struck grin, and leaned in to kiss her. "Gross, aunts, stop that," Jake wailed from right next to us. For a 6-year-old, he already had the makings of a career in drama. "Okay, we'll stop," I teased before snagging him with one arm to pull him down in between us and smother him with kisses. He shrieked and giggled, and we laughed, and the light beat down golden and white from above. "You're an angel," I sighed gratefully as Amy handed me an ice-cold water bottle dripping with condensation. Machu Picchu was beautiful, but the hike to get up there? Not so much. Her smile and eyes thinned before she pointed towards some shade under a hanging rock. "Come on, let's get out of the light." The weather had been amazing so far, fluffy clouds and beams of sun making for amazing views but coming with a side of heat exhaustion. I mumbled agreement and shuffled over to the shadows, ungracefully plopping to the ground. I took a large gulp and sighed in appreciation. "I don't know how you do it, Ames, but you picked the perfect time of year." There were way fewer people than I'd expected for such a clear day, but maybe they were being smart and not risking heat stroke. She shrugged one shoulder with a small smile. "Got lucky, I guess. I have you with me, after all. You ready to go?" I finished off the last dregs of water and tucked the bottle into my pack. "Of course not. There's so much more to see." She nodded and took my hand, and we stepped back out into the sun. "Inconceivable!" I shrieked as Amy threw a bundle of grass at me, laughing uncontrollably. "Betrayal. Pain. From my own Princess Buttercup. It's the cliffs of insanity, the end is inevitable." She shouted back, gesturing broadly towards the ocean. We were visiting the cliffs of Moha, technically, in Ireland. We watched The Princess Bride on our first date, and Amy had always wanted to come here. Besides, I'm definitely the Dread Pirate Roberts. You're Buttercup. What makes you Wesley? Besides your dashing good looks, I asked with a grin, clutching a bunch of flowers and using my other hand to shield my eyes from the sun, looking for an opening to throw the projectiles. I'm on a quest to retrieve my princess, Amy declared, striking a dramatic pose. Even though she threw a rock at me while I was taking pictures. It was a pebble, I objected, but dropped my haphazard weapon. You weren't paying attention to me. Besides, no one else is around to be casualties. The grassy cliff tops were almost empty besides us, a few distant figures the only other signs of life. The weather was beautiful though, especially for Ireland, where bright clear days like this were surely few and far between. No, they're not, she agreed. She looked so beautiful like this, the sun lighting her up from behind. You ready to go? Not quite. I wanna stay here a little longer. I looked out over the waves, but I could still feel her looking at me. Ruby, what are you doing? I smiled innocently as I floated past Amy, who was standing in the shore with a defeated look. It's hot out there, Ames. I'm just cooling off. The hidden waterfall we had hiked it to see was gorgeous, and the water splashing off it had tempted me too much to stay out. You know we can't stay here forever, she warned, but I could see a hidden smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. I kicked my legs so a splash of water hit her feet. Come on, baby, live a little, I teased. It's like our own private lagoon. It was like something out of a movie, despite the beautifully clear water and bright jungle flowers, no one else was in the clearing. You sure you're not ready to go? Amy asked, but kicked her shoes off like she already knew my answer, keeping her eyes trained on me. Not yet, I said with a grin, and dove under the water. What do you think happens after you die? I looked over to see Amy staring at the ceiling, nose scrunched in thought. We were laying in bed, but the light streaming in from the windows was too bright for sleep. I rolled onto my side and kissed one of the many freckles dotting her shoulder. Yikes, thinking about death already? Was I that bad? She snorted out a laugh, and stole even more of the covers from me. No, doofus, it was great and you know it. I was just thinking, you know. She turned her head, gazing at me instead of the lights. Do you think any part of us sticks around? I hummed and wrapped my arm around her waist to pull her closer. I dunno. This line of questioning came up sometimes. Ames was raised in a very religious household, and occasionally she'd wander back to old thoughts. I think it's peaceful, whatever it is. Heaven, or just fading away. I'd like to think that it's like that warm, fuzzy feeling you get from lying in the sun. I kissed her temple, then added, no hell, though. You don't believe in hell? Amy asked, cracking a grin. Ruby Moore, the same girl who got plastered at a bonfire and was convinced she had died and I was a demon trying to seduce her? That was Halloween, you were literally wearing a devil costume, I protested with a laugh. But nah. I mean, maybe there is one, but we're not going there. I paused while she tangled our fingers together. Well, you're not. And there's nothing in this universe that could keep me apart from you. You big sap, Amy teased with a shaky smile, her eyes suspiciously shiny. Me neither, you know. I'll do whatever it takes to have you with me. Or, I love you too, darling, I said, pressing a messy kiss to the corner of her mouth. Don't worry. We've got a while before we have to worry about that. She turned her head enough to kiss me back, then said, gazing into my eyes, we've got a lot to see. You ready to go? Nah, I've got everything I want to do right here, I teased, and kissed her again as she laughed. Hey, Ames? I glanced over at my wife, who was staring at me instead of out over the city. We were alone on top of the Eiffel Tower in the blazing heat, and Paris was lit up by lights and the sky. The city of love, the brightest I'd ever seen it. Which was an odd thought to have, because I'd never been to Paris before. Don't you think it's weird there's no one else up here with us? It is, she said with a nod. Her eyes were fixed on mine, and the air was quiet, and the sun was very hot. I swallowed, and looked back over the rooftops, and down into all the empty buildings, and all the empty homes, and all the empty streets. And it's weird, I said carefully, no longer a question, that I don't remember how we got here. Or how we got anywhere we've been. It is, she said again, softly, and took my hand in hers. Where are we, Amy? This was our honeymoon. She smiled, and suddenly seemed much older than 24. I'm not allowed to tell you anything else. What do you, not allowed, was? I managed to get out, mind reeling from whatever was going on. I'm not allowed to tell you anything else. But, she said quietly, and squeezed my hand before leaning in to whisper, don't you think it's been awfully bright? I don't know what to do. We're in this big, bright, empty room now. I guess it's a blocked-off part of a museum? I don't remember coming here. Amy won't answer my questions, and I don't know how I still have cell service. Will someone tell me what's going on? Story 4, a classmate of mine killed our teacher in front of us. To say it sounds cliché is the absolute truth. It truly was a normal day, a Tuesday to be exact. I'm an 11th grade student, a junior if you're in the US, and like any other kid, attend school. Recently, however, we were struck with the inevitable. Someone came into our school, carrying various firearms, and went off. I was at school that day, integrated geometry class, at around 10:30 in the morning. It was a good halfway through the class, we were in the middle of taking notes. The way my teacher does it, we copy down what she writes down in a notebook, we do examples, yada yada yada, then we get homework. I was very accustomed to this, as it was second semester already, and was very invested in my work. There's no way to transition this in any other way than to tell what happened next. We all heard it, a popping sound from through the walls. It sounded as if something heavy had just fallen somewhere outside the room. We all slowly lifted our heads, and looked back down at our papers. In the moment, it just seemed like a normal occurrence. It wasn't until we heard a loud scream, when we all knew something was up. As soon as the scream registered in our minds, there were two simultaneous pops, and then silence. We all looked amongst each other, our eyes wide, and our mouths hanging open. Our teacher dropped her pencil, and yelled for us to get down on the floor. We all obeyed, as more small explosions fired off down the hall. In the moment, I wasn't terrified as most people think they would be. I was most definitely in shock. I didn't make a sound as I crawled into the corner. I crawled next to a fellow classmate. We exchanged looks of shock as more and more students followed us. Me and a few others decided to pull the desks over our heads, and hit the floor. Girls wept, trying not to make too much noise as more and more pops echoed down the hallways like a drum. We heard a voice come from the hallway. "Get back here." The voice yelled. It was a student's voice, a male. A bang rang out and he laughed as he presumably shot down whoever slipped from his grasp. We lay there for what seemed like hours, as we listened to people scream, only to be covered up by the sounds of raining bullets. I could hear the person yelling orders at people like, "Stand up," or "Get out from under there." I clenched my eyelids shut as I heard people beg for their lives to be spared, only to get a gunshot blast in return. My eyes snapped open when I heard our classroom door get kicked. It was locked, as our teacher had locked it as we were all scrambling towards the corner of the room. A shot blasted through the window that was built into the side of the door. My classmates screamed as the glass shattered to the ground and whoever was entering yelled, "Open up." I heard the sound of boots walk across the tile floors. I tried to see who it was without making any movements. All I could get a look at was a pair of black boots, and the barrel of a shotgun hanging down to the floor next to them. The invader yelled for us to all stand up. A few of my classmates did. I didn't, as I couldn't move my muscles, my limbs violently shook. A bullet ricocheted off the ground in front of us. "Stand the fuck up." The person yelled. The rest of us slowly crawled to our feet. We were all shaking, tears streaming down our faces. When I looked up, I saw the person, and I instantly recognized who it was. It was Evan. Evan was the druggy kid who had the long, greasy hair, death metal t-shirts, and always wore black. I instantly remembered his absence in class that day, and my heart sank. "Mrs. Hoffman," he said, pointing his shotgun at our teacher. Mrs. Hoffman cowered against the wall as we stepped away from her. "Get up here," Evan said. When Mrs. Hoffman failed to comply, he raised the gun and shot it at the ceiling. I flinched as the sound exploded in my ears. Mrs. Hoffman began sobbing and slowly walked forward. Evan yanked her closer toward him, throwing her against an upturned desk. She fell against the ground and begged for him to not shoot. Evan aimed the gun at her, and the words that fell from his lips were ones that echoed in my head during the nightmares. I would hear them bounce around inside my head when I would collapse on the floor, sobbing, and screaming for him not to shoot. Evan sniffed and said, "Class dismissed." The shotgun blast exploded through Mrs. Hoffman's skull, showering the wall behind her. Kids cowered in fear, most of them cried, but I just stood there, as I heard the shotgun shells clatter to the floor, and Evan wiped the splattered remains of Mrs. Hoffman off his face. He spit on the floor and turned to the class. He just smirked, and turned around. He marched out of the room, squeezing through the broken window and back into the hallway. The next half hour was spent with kids crying all around me, with me sitting against the wall, replaying what just happened in my mind. Mrs. Hoffman lay in a heap a few feet from us. We heard running footsteps approach the door. 2 police officers ran in, distress. "Get the hell out of here," one of them said, "and run as fast as you can, away from the school." There was a swarm of students as we trampled each other to get out of the door. I ran into the hallway, seeing 2 students laying in the hallway, motionless. I quickly headed down the stairs, breaking through the front doors. I clasped my hands behind my head as I sprinted past a group of police officers running past me into the school. I just kept running. Story 5, my next door neighbor dared me to go into an abandoned house. I still have nightmares. Mrs. Gunter was a widow, her husband had drowned some long-forgotten evening ago. Of course, local legend and rumors swirled around her like crows. In 1988, when I was 14, she passed away, leaving behind no children or grandchildren and a vacant house filled with forgotten memories. That Halloween, Billy Murch from across the street dared me to go in. "Come on dude, you're not a pussy, are you?" He was older and bigger than me, so the correct answer to that question was always, no. Followed by a dismissive eye roll. Following me onto the lawn, Billy pulled out a cigarette and motioned to the house. "I'll be right out here," he said, lighting the cigarette and blowing the smoke in my face. "Thanks Billy," I said, coughing. The house loomed dark, shadowy and ominous over me. I shuffled up to the front door and, brushing off any bad feelings, I had grabbed the door handle. Everything went quiet. No leaves rustling, no whisper of the autumn chill in the air, nothing. The air felt dead and I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand straight up. "Come on pussy," Billy yelled, slicing through the silence. Taking a deep breath, I opened the front door and pulled out a flashlight and clicked it on. Looking back to Billy for reassurance, the door slammed shut behind me and my flashlight went dead. Silence. Musty darkness. My heart beating faster than the time I drank 5 cups of coffee. I couldn't see my own hands, it was so dark. And then something breathed into my ear. "SHH. It said. I couldn't help it, but I screamed. And then it was quiet again. Dead quiet. And then "Kid," a voice murmured from behind me. My heart sank and my arm hairs prickled as I turned around. Instinctively I clicked the flashlight and it flickered on dimly. I didn't want to shine my flashlight where I did because the voice was so familiar, but it didn't make sense. It was Billy. Billy stood there with a knife gouged so deeply in his chest that the cruel silver blade pierced through the other side and glinted in the dim light. And then he was dead on the floor, blood seeping out of him and staining decrepit carpet. Without even thinking, or knowing what I was doing, I felt my legs throw myself out the nearest window and out into the cool night. I laid on the porch, shivering, glass stinging everywhere and blood pouring down my face like a shot from a horror movie. After 2 trick-or-treaters, 12 cops and a whole slew of investigations later, the house was knocked down. Billy's murder remains an unsolved mystery, itself wrapped up in local legend and rumors. But I still have nightmares of that night. The very memory pressed into my mind like sound to vinyl. And this is going to sound utterly nuts, but I saw Mrs. Gunter. I saw her standing over Billy like a lion over its prey. And that's a memory that's mine forever. Story 6, No Sleep. This has been going on for weeks, and I feel sick from the crippling fear and severe lack of sleep I've endured. I will do my absolute best to write out everything that has been happening. To begin, allow me to help paint a mental picture of my home. I live in a somewhat small house with a long, narrow hallway that can be pretty scary to venture in when you need to use the bathroom at night. It gets pitch black with only a thin, rectangle of light shining from the glass in the front door. This story begins when that sliver of light went out. I'm an artist, traditional, of course. I will never understand the use of digital objects to produce art. I tried it once, and it was a horrid experience. My art studio opens up into the hallway, and is diagonally across from the bathroom, and as you exit on the left and head down the hall, it connects to the bedroom and lounging area. As you exit on the right, you come to the dining room hall, and then into the kitchen when you take another left. Now, I pull a lot of late nights when inspiration strikes, and this can have me up until 2 to 4 a.m. This particular night, 2 a.m. ticks around, and all the coffee I drank had finally caught up with me, and I had a desperate urge to relieve myself. I went out the hall, looking both ways like I usually do. But when I looked left towards the front door, it was pitch black. No rectangle of light, just pure, terrifying darkness. I figured maybe the streetlight went out, so I brushed it off and went to the bathroom. On my way back, there was light again, only something was in front of it. The light from the door revealed an outline of what looked like a rather large person hunched over and covered in blankets. I called out thinking it may have been my wife, Sarah, playing a joke on me. But I got no answer. I inched slowly towards the figure, but as I got closer, I could hear a faint wheezing, which I can only describe as the sound that creepy bear thing made in the movie, Annihilation. Sarah? I called out again, but the closer I got, the more terrifying the noise. It sounded more raspy than before, and almost like it was whispering something to itself, over and over, but I couldn't make it out. I'm not gonna lie, I was boo myself scared at this point, because it definitely was not my wife. She has a smaller and delicate frame anyway. I bolted back to my studio and locked up. Conveniently, my phone chimed shortly after slamming the door. I flipped it open, and read a message from my wife asking if it was me slamming things around in the hall. I texted her as quick as my flip phone allowed, and told her to climb out the window and call the police. Soon after, I heard a gentle knock at my door. Crap. I thought to myself, she didn't listen. I opened the door quickly. Sarah, what I saw will stay with me for the rest of my life. I don't know how best to describe this, I'm shaking just thinking back on it. That thing was covered in some sort of thick and dark-colored blanket. It had deep gray, wrinkled and rough skin, sunken eyes in pitch-black circles and dull orange irises. The worst part of this creature was the huge Cheshire cat grin it held on its disgusting face. I slammed the door so hard it woke me up. Yes, you read that correctly, I was dreaming, I think. I awoke on the studio floor with lots of little black dots running up my arms. Barely noticeable, but definitely there. The sound of the toaster popping up startled me, but immediately made me feel safe, because I knew my wife was making breakfast. I walked out. She smiled at me. Why didn't you come to bed last night? She asked, placing the toast on the table with my coffee. With her arms out like that, her sleeve lifted just enough for me to see the same little black dots on her arms as on mine. Sarah, where did you get these? I asked, grabbing her arm and pulling up her sleeve. Her innocent eyes looked at me confused. Get what? She asked. There is nothing there, Mel. Right, maybe I'm hallucinating them, I figured, you know, because of the late night. Oh, it's nothing, never mind. I chuckled nervously and then seated myself across from her. The rest of the morning was quiet, with only a few concerned looks from Sarah shot in my direction. Nighttime comes around, and I'm up until 2 a.m. again. I finish up for the night, and take my coffee cup to the sink. Soon as I close the door to the dining room, I see the figure again. Its edges dimly lit by the door so as to reveal its shape, only this time it was moving. Shuffling along, slowly dragging itself towards me. I let out a scream and ran for the room closest to where I was, the studio, and locked myself in. Once again, a gentle knock hit the door. Go away. I'm not opening this door. I yelled, hoping whatever it was would leave. What? Why not? But, what I heard was my wife's voice, Sarah. I cautiously moved towards the door, and she confirmed it was her. I opened it and there she was. My smaller and delicate wife. Except, the last thing I remember was her blood-curdling scream right before I woke up. The black dots on my arm were bigger and more noticeable. Like a tattoo, but rough. The sound of the toaster popping up startled me, but immediately made me feel safe, because I knew my wife's era was making breakfast. I walked out. She smirked at me. Why didn't you come to bed last night? She asked, placing the toast on the table with my coffee. With her arms out like that, her sleeve lifted just enough for me to see her dots had gotten bigger too. Sarah, where did you get these? I asked, grabbing her arm and pulling up her sleeve. She looked at me confused. Get what? She asked. There is nothing there, Mel. Right, maybe I'm hallucinating them, I figured, because of the late night. It's nothing, never mind. I chuckled nervously, then seated myself across from her. The rest of the morning was quiet, with only a few smirks from Sarah shot in my direction. 2 nights pass, almost like I never lived them at all, and I feel like I haven't slept either. But regardless, I pulled another late night. This time, until 3 a.m. 2 a.m. rolls around and, oh, crap. I muttered, I needed a refill. I looked at the door to my studio, knowing just how much I did not want to go out there. Then my attention was taken to the big black dots on my arms. They're getting itchy now, fantastic. After taking a deep breath for courage, I ventured out into the kitchen to make another coffee. Just as I got the hot water going, I could hear a dragging sound, like someone was dragging their slippers along a carpeted floor. I should add, we have wooden floors, only the bedroom and lounge room have carpet. I thought it was Sarah. I called out. No answer. I walked to the door and opened it just a little to peek through. There it was, again. Wheezing and whispering in that raspy voice, shuffling itself forward and staring right at me. Its horrible eyes were filled with desperation. I can only guess to reach me. Lord knows what it would do if it did. And the smell, oh my goodness, the smell, it was like a rotting animal and made me sick to my stomach. I slammed the door, hard enough to wake myself up, apparently. When I did, I puked immediately. I'm not even sure I'm dreaming to wake myself up at this point, and it feels like my days are repeating. I'm writing this out just after eating breakfast today, and it was the same as yesterday and the weeks before. I've not slept properly at all, and my arms are completely covered in those dots now. They're deep gray and rough. My eyes have black circles from barely sleeping, and I have the shakes. But that's not what I have to worry about. My wife, she won't stop grinning at me, almost like she can't control it. It's like that damn Shizaya cat smile. Almost as though the smile is eating at her face. Her mouth is always bleeding, expanding, and the dots have consumed her whole body. Her skin is a deep gray, rough, and her eyes sunken in pitch black circles with orange irises. And, she seems larger than I remember, like her bone structure is changing. She's always covering herself in thick gray blankets, and she won't, or more like she can't talk to me. I can hear her shuffling down the hallway now. I can't write anymore. But if anything else happens, I'll update. Story 7, I bought a Build-A-Bear on eBay. The nearest Build-A-Bear is a 2-hour drive from my house. Said 2-hour drive would be for the 4-year-old who started screaming when I told her she couldn't get the cute sparkle bunny she saw on the ad. This is why I like Netflix better than cable TV. No ads that result in an extremely uncalled for tantrum. So no. No way in hell would I be going to Build-A-Bear, 2 hours away, with a screaming toddler, to blow some $30–40 on a plush she'd be bored of in approximately 3 weeks. But it was almost her birthday. And I've been too busy with work and Jacqueline to sit down and browse Amazon, much less go to an actual store to find her a gift. I want the cute sparkle bunny, Mama. I need it. Jacqueline whimpered as I laid her to bed that night. She was no longer screaming and crying, but she would not shut up about the bunny. I know, baby girl, I told her yet again. I'll tell you what, we can go shopping on Friday, alright? See if you can find something even more sparkly, yeah? Jax wasn't convinced. She mumbled something. I kissed her forehead and said good night. Maybe in the morning she'd forget about it, I thought. I prayed. I sat down with my laptop, catching up on any emails I may have missed from work. There was an eBay email, which I always deleted, but I had an idea. Maybe I could find her coveted Build-A-Bear bunny there. It would certainly be cheaper, and hopefully if I found one, it wouldn't be too used. I tried my luck. About the 5th page in, I found one. Brand new, and only $20. Buy it now, even. Perfect. I wasted no time in ordering it. Half of me wanted to tell Jax immediately, but the logical half screamed that she's sleeping and needs to learn to take no for an answer. The package arrived a day before her birthday. I pulled the bunny out of the box and inspected it. It felt a bit lumpy, maybe, but what do I know? Never had a Build-A-Bear. I contemplated wrapping it or just giving it to her right then and there. I opted for the latter. She'd finally start behaving, so I wanted to reward the good behavior. Jax, I said as I approached her room. Yeah, Mama? I want you to know I'm very proud of you. I know you were upset about not getting the bunny. You started handling it like such a big girl. Jacqueline beamed. I stopped crying. I love my bear, too, she said, holding out one of her stuffed animals she at one point had lost interest in pretty quickly. He loves you, too, baby girl. And so do I. Happy birthday. I held the bunny out for her. Jax screeched and grabbed it and squeezed me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. She's so cute. I love her. Thank you, Mama. She hugged the bunny, a slight wince as she did so. What's that? She asked, poking the bunny's back. I took the bunny back momentarily and prodded it. I dunno, I said. Kinda strange. She shrugged and grabbed it back, thanking me again. I didn't think anything of it, nor did Jax, until a couple nights after her birthday. Mama? She asked as I was leaving her room. Sparky smells kinda gross, can you give her a bath? Yeah, sure, I responded. Maybe it wasn't so brand new after all. I can tomorrow, if you want. Tonight? Bear will stay with me. Oh? Alright, if you want. I was a bit taken aback then. Maybe it came from a smoker's home. Jax and I are both sensitive to cigarette smoke. I took the bunny and said goodnight again. I noticed the gross smell immediately, bringing the toy close to my nose to inspect further. I almost dropped it as I gagged. What the fuck? I checked the tag for laundry instructions. Surface wash only. Of course. I scrubbed the shit out of that thing, and it still smelled rotten. That minute, of all times, was I reminded of the odd lumps. I felt around again. There was no way this was just normal stuffing. I grabbed a pair of scissors and snipped a few stitches, the stench hitting me like a fucking train. I fought the urge to gag as I removed enough stitches to peer into it. I stumbled back, dropping the bunny to the ground as multiple small bones clattered out. A small mangled head peeked out of the opening, grey matter and coagulated blood pooling out like sludge, staining the bunny's white fur. I covered the mess with a towel and ran to get Jax and take her to the neighbors before I called the police. I don't want to know the specifics. I don't know what sick fuck did this. I don't want to know who the child was. I just know the eBay account I ordered from was deleted and they found the monster. The less I knew, the less Jax could find out. That was that, I thought. I had the night and most of the next day to come to terms with it, to cry, and then to compose myself. Like I said, my girl doesn't need to know any of this. I need to stay strong for Jax. Mama, look. Jacqueline exclaimed the next afternoon when I picked her up. My stomach dropped. Jax. Baby? Where did you get that? My new friend. I met her this morning. She said thank you for cleaning Sparky. Jax almost threw it into my arms before she skipped towards our house. I looked down at the bunny. The police had it. There's no way this was the one. No matter what, here was her bunny, clean and sparkly as ever, a fresh rose scent in its fur. I felt a hand on my arm. Jax? I thought you. A child, barely older than Jacqueline, stared up at me with a soft smile. I felt a chill run down my spine, but I reached out to touch her hair. It was velvety and cold and dewy. I glanced at my house at the sound of Jacqueline's voice beckoning me back inside. I turned back, and the girl was gone. You're welcome, sweetheart. Story 8, The Vivid Madness of Henry Danforth. I met Danforth when I was in my 20s, he in his late teens. Though 4 years my junior, his capacity for intelligence far surpassed my own, and his theories in mathematics, science, literature, and theology were to myself and our instructors equally astounding. I believed myself lucky to be Danforth's friend, considering he had relatively few, choosing instead to work in isolation. Universities watched Danforth's meteoric rise through the ranks of grade school with eager anticipation, coveting him from the moment he jumped from the 8th grade to the 10th. Of course, he picked the school which he hoped would provide him the greatest challenges, and numerous scholarships allowed him to do so. His dedication to learning, to knowledge, and to his faith were unwavering. It is for this reason that I was concerned when he stopped attending classes. At first, I assumed an illness, a family emergence, or some other misfortune preoccupied Henry. However, when days of absence grew to weeks, I took it upon myself to uncover Henry's causes on my own. Saturdays in New England tend to be rainy, and the day I arrived my friend's tiny apartment was no exception. I pounded on the door impatiently, the grey skies spitting icy shards at my coat and off the brim of my hat. The cobbled street was covered in puddles, and my shoes were soaking after the brief walk from the university dormitories Danforth's apartment. After a moment, I heard a rough shambling from the other side of the door, followed by the distinct click of the lock. Danforth opened the door, and I did my best to conceal my surprise. The boy I'd known, small but broad in the shoulders with sharp features, had been reduced to a state resembling an elderly man. Haggard, pale, and hunched, he looked at me excitedly. "Gilman," he said, opening the door wider. Come in, come in. There's something you must see." Though he appeared weak, I was shocked by the strength in the pale arm that suddenly pulled me through the portal into his apartment. At the revelation of Danforth's living space, I was petrified. Inside were rows upon rows of horrific carven blasphemies, chiseled in what appeared to be solid stone. There must have been 50 of them at least, with roughly 25 on either side of the apartment's walls, creating a narrow walkway to a desk against a wall littered with hundreds of scribbled, torn, papers. Each of the grotesques was uniquely disconcerting, their lifelike gazes penetrating through my skin into my very soul. Some resembled swine, though drooling and evil, with human-like eyes wrought with anger and pain. Others bore canine features, yet with those same unnervingly human eyes, and others still bore a resemblance to eldritch horrors that I cannot begin to describe, but still with the cruel eyes of men. Haunting though these visages were, I feared most the look possessing my friend. His unfailing smile seemed as carved onto his face as the eyes did on each of the monstrous gargoyles as he pulled me closer towards the desk. "Here, here," he kept saying, almost throwing me towards the documents. I caught myself and my breath, suddenly desiring the rainy New England sky to the Danforth's increasingly dark dwelling. Henry shuffled through a stack of papers, looking for something specific, when he began speaking clearly, though his voice still was ragged and breathing shallow. "We've been fools, Gilman," he said, still digging through the papers. "All of us. The professors, the priests. We've been going about this the wrong way. I figured it out, you see. To find the truth, we must not look to our hearts, but to our minds. Our mathematics. Gently, but firmly, I replied. Danforth, you look half mad, and sound doubly so. Please, get some air with me, some food, I began, but Henry shoved a scrap of paper into my face before I could finish. On the paper was a single, logical, mathematical equation, not too complicated, with figures I was mostly familiar with. But when I saw the equation, I understood. Horrified, I pushed the paper away, stumbling away from the lunatic that had been Henry Danforth. For with such knowledge, how could one keep his sanity? I pushed past the demonic carvings, their evil visages searing into my memory, blindly reaching for the door, Danforth's insane laughter echoing behind me. I understood then why he carved such blasphemous beasts from stone. His muse was not his imagination, nor a nightmare, but a reality proved by his equation. A reality, a space, we share with these demons, these terrors that we choose not to see, that men cannot comprehend. By God, Henry Danforth discovered the formula that lets men see into hell. Story 9, I swear. I swear. People say it all the time. A validation of what they did or didn't do. Mom, I swear I didn't spill the juice. I swear I didn't tell her. Some people, to truly show that they are telling the truth, swear on people or things. That's what happened to me, and I wish I hadn't. The first experience happened when I was 7. I snuck my little chubby fingers into my mom's freshly baked cake, pulled a chunk off and ate it. I left the kitchen in a hurry, poorly washed my hands and face, and went outside to play with my dog, Rudy. Around 5 my mom called me in to get ready for dinner and wash up. As I walked to the bathroom to wash my hands, my mom's voice stopped me dead in my track. Hey, Caden, did you eat some of my cake? I turned around and knew if I admitted to it I would get punished, so I lied. No, Mom. I could tell she thought I was lying. So to convince her I added something a little extra. I swear on Rudy I didn't do it. Once I said this, my mom let it go and I went to the bathroom and continued to get washed up for dinner. After dinner I brushed my teeth and laid down. My mom tucked me in, and as I lay there I realized my furry companion wasn't laying with me like he usually did every night. I figured he was sleeping in his dog bed that night and I fell asleep. The next morning when I woke up I went downstairs to let Rudy out to go to the bathroom, but to my surprise Rudy was already outside. Only he was dead. Lying in a pile of blood with a little letter written folded up next to him. I picked it up and read it. It said, "Do you really swear?" I screamed and ran upstairs to alert my parents. They told me that he was probably attacked by an animal in the night hell. I never showed them the letter because I knew that would blame me for it and I already felt guilty. So life went on. I grew up and pushed the incident out of my head, but when I was 15 or when things got even worse. One night I was hanging out with my friend and we were playing Truth or Dare. Trying to play it safe, I chose truth. What's your deepest, darkest secret? I was reluctant but I trusted him, so I explained the story of Rudy. Of course my friend didn't believe me. Prove it, he said. Not wanting to be a chicken and not really believing that anything would happen, I swore on our very much hated math teacher. I swear on Mr. Rodriguez that I didn't eat eggs this morning. Of course I had really eaten eggs. Me and my friend parted ways and met up at school the next morning. When we arrived at Spanish class, Mr. Rodriguez was nowhere to be found. Later I found out that he was missing. Later that day he was found dead in his apartment. The next experience was one of the worst. There was a girl named Lainey. I liked her, so I asked her out. To my surprise she said no and yelled at me that she could never like someone like me. So as I walked into class I told Caden, he swear on Lainey I never liked her. Right as I said it I regretted it. When the last bell rung I went home and felt sick. I didn't know what to do. I puked on my bathroom floor and laid on my bed. I eventually fell asleep, tossing and turning all night. When I woke up I googled Lainey's name and nothing came. Relief flooded over me, but when I went downstairs I found her laying on the floor, dead. I immediately rushed upstairs, grabbed a few things, stole my parents' car and left. Now here I sit in this bar talking to a guy next to me. Hey, I got 20 on Green Bay. he said. I replied, I got 20 on the Bears. I swear on my life they'll win. Story 10, What I Wrote in My Sleep. I'm not sure how to preface this. I don't really have any recollection of writing this, and I have no idea what this is talking about, but it's in my handwriting and it was there when I woke up this morning, on the side of my bed. This has never happened to me before, and every time I read it I get the eerie feeling that someone is watching me or standing behind me. But there's never anyone there. Look, I have no idea what this means. I don't have a background story for this. No other accounts of me writing in my sleep, no weird dreams or anything like that. Maybe I didn't even write it. But it was in my handwriting, and it was in my room, in my journal, and I live alone, so who else would have written it? I supposed I should tell you what exactly it is. It's a poem. One that doesn't really make any sense to me, but it's a poem. It rhymes, and it's set up like one. I just need someone else to read it. Maybe someone will recognize it. I don't know. I just don't know. I'm just asking that you read this and let me know if any of this sounds familiar. Does the name Willy Wally Soo ring any bells? Whoever it is appears to be the main focus of the poem. It also mentions some land called Triticlobu. I'm not even sure how you would pronounce that. Anyway, I don't really have much to say about this, so I guess here it is. Do you know Sue, Willy Wally Sue? Only few do, but she's looking for you. Not many know. Too many go. Living along, like nothing is wrong. Oh, but they're wrong. Only a few have ever seen Sue. Knocking on the door of the land of Triticlobu. All the way, from far far away. They travel to be with Willy Wally Sue. Helping her out. Ever so fond. Running around for Willy Wally Sue, in the land of Triticlobu. Do you know Sue, Willy Wally Sue? Only few do, but she's watching you. Never too close. Timid old Sue. Lurking around, in the shadows and sounds. Only to check up on you. On occasion, with admiration, she knowingly watches you breathe. Always while you're deep, deep in your slumber. Together you dream, while she's pulling you under. Happily down, to Triticlobu. Except on occasion, with hesitation. Rapidly you wake up, and leave Willy Wally Sue. Do you know Sue, Willy Wally Sue? Only few do, but she only wants you. Nevertheless, you test her patience, but she can't wait much longer, in Triticlobu. Like a lion she sneaks, into your dreams. Only to get you. Only to scare you. Knowing you won't be able to move. And sometimes you'll see her smile maybe. Tentatively from the corner of your bed. Her eyes will grow darker, her smile much harsher. Every time, you pull out of her trance. Run if you can, for she'll get you, and drag you to Triticlobu. Do you know Sue, Willy Wally Sue? Now you do, you've summoned her too. She's heard your call. Now she's coming for you. Story 11, If you see the lights you will taste the blood. I was only 84 miles into a 470-mile journey when it started to happen. There was no one else on the road for miles. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd passed another soul. I was pretty used to the journey by that point, tackling the 940-mile return every other week to visit my girlfriend. We knew it would be something we'd have to get used to as soon as we announced to one another our own university plans. We weren't the type of couple to force a decision based on the choice of the other, despite the fact that year after year through high school we were awarded the title of couple most likely to make it, something that Carrie was very proud of each and every year, even if she wouldn't always admit it to me. On such a desolate route you learn to find company and solace in the modern technologies. Usually, no matter the time I would have Carrie on the loudspeaker for the majority of the journey, we'd discuss our plans for the weekend ahead, update each other on the day events, and pretty much just gush about how much we'd missed each other. This trip, however, was a surprise, so I really was alone for the whole journey this time. Even such a short distance in I had already turned to the radio to keep me sane. Bluetoothed albums and Spotify playlists were all well and good, but I was craving the accompaniment of a real human voice, and late night radio was as close as I could get. The late night DJs were continuously begging for listeners to call in, just as desperate for human interaction as I was apparently. I won't lie, there were a few moments even I was tempted. It wasn't Carrie, but it counted for something at least. But then I'd think about the other listeners, and about the fact that I had literally nothing interesting to talk about. Interesting things didn't happen to me. Needless to say, I was never caller number one. I was on the kind of road absent of street lamps. The nearest services was another 72 miles away. I was in the ass-crack middle of nowhere. I glanced down at the dashboard. The gas dial was still sitting comfortingly close to F, and even the engine light that I hid behind a small gold star sticker wasn't glowing around the edges. I'll be there in no time, I muttered to myself, hoping that the more I said it the more I might believe it. Purple Rain was just coming to its climactic end when I was violently snapped back to reality as a sharp, ear-piercing static shot over the radio. Muffled words flew across the airwaves. It was a stern and monotonous voice, breaking in and out, constantly fighting with Purple Rain's final chords. Foxtrot, Scar, was all I really managed to make out. To be fair, I wasn't really trying to hear it, I was mostly waiting for the signal to fall back onto the station. God only knew what 80s tune they had queued next, and I didn't want to miss it. The radio flicked back into action just as the DJ was introducing a classic from Wham, and like that, I fell into the laid-back rhythm of the journey once more. The radio cut in and out a few more times over the next 10 or 15 minutes, but I just assumed it was location-based. Maybe I was traveling under a military satellite that was no doubt blinking away in the sky above. I thought I caught the word uniform at one point, but with the assumption of it being a military connection I was catching that didn't seem all that out of place. I looked at the dashboard, another 26 miles down, and it was only just gone 1 a.m. I was making good time. If I continued at that pace I could be there before Carrie even woke up. I could maybe even let myself in and make her breakfast without her even knowing that, or I could just slide into bed with her. My mind, and body, was just beginning to drift with this thought when I saw a light ahead. It would be the first car, the first human for that matter, that I'd seen pretty much since I set out. It was a red flash, like a hazard. Like a breakdown? Would I stop for them? Should I stop for them? I didn't know. All I did know was that my mother would kill me if she ever found out I did. 4 miles later and I seemed to finally be getting closer to the light. I'd already decided, with somewhat flawed and tired judgment, that if it was a breakdown I would indeed stop and see if they needed any help. Carrie would have said it's the Christian thing to do, and thinking of that was all the convincing I needed. 5 miles and the light was brighter. 6 miles and it was bigger. 7 miles and it was gone. I slowed suddenly, staring at first straight ahead, then to each side of the dust-lined road, and then even behind, as if I could have possibly driven right past a stranded car without even noticing. There was nothing, and even more than that, there was nowhere for anyone to disappear to either. The road stretched on, both ahead and behind, 4 miles and further than the eye could see. The next turn wasn't for at least 50 more miles. The sides of the road consisted of narrow dust shoulders before giving way to steep banks, reaching at least 5 feet above road height and densely populated by a field of healthy evergreens. I wondered if it could have been a trick of the light, maybe something reflecting onto the road from the sky, or maybe even an animal's eyes reflecting my own headlights. Whatever it was, in that moment in time, it seemed best not to give it too much thought. Instead, I turned up the radio, opened my window a crack for some fresh air, and I kept driving. It wasn't even 5 minutes later, however, when it happened again. The lights, bright, red and flashing, were staring right back at me from no more than 10 miles away. I tried to stay calm as I approached, telling myself it was nothing, telling myself it was fine. My hands shook on the steering wheel and my breath grew more shaky and shallow with every mile. Again, like I really hoped it wouldn't, the exact same thing happened. I could literally watch the miles tick by in the exact same way. 4 miles and I was closer. 5 miles and it was brighter. 6 miles and it was bigger. 7 miles and it was gone. Maybe I'm tired, I thought to myself. maybe I am too tired to be driving. I wondered this knowing that it would make no difference. I wouldn't want to pull over and nap on the side of that road even if I hadn't been seeing Satan's light show. There was no way in hell I was going to now. I was over the moon elated when a further 10 minutes went past without the lights returning. Suddenly I felt safe again, even on that dark lonesome road. I felt like it was just a blip and now I was back on track to get to Carrie. I thought again about sliding into bed with her. I'd sneak in and snuggle up. It was cold this time of year, so instinctively she'd move in even if she didn't wake, and then she'd get to wake up in my arms like magic, like I'd been there all along. Flash. Oh God, no. Flash. Flash. The light was back. I slowed the car slightly, wondering if I should stop it and wait it out completely. But I'd heard about things like that, distraction tactics on the roads, mostly targeted at women, so that gangs could hijack you and steal your car, or do even worse. I kept moving, rolling the car along a slow mile at a time. Before I knew it, another 4 miles was down and those lights looked closer than ever. 5 brighter. 6 bigger. 7, and it was still there. I held my breath as I approached it, seemingly getting closer than I ever had before. It was maybe 1 mile up the road when I noticed it moving. Not forward, or backward, or side to side, but up. I slammed my foot down onto the gas and soared forward before I even questioned why. The closer I got, the more I could see, because it wasn't disappearing this time. I was half a mile away when everything stopped. The car silenced and froze in place. Static broke out over the radio once more, but it was clear this time. It was the same voice but faster, and more aggressive. Sierra Echo Echo Sierra Echo Echo Sierra Echo Echo Sierra Echo Echo, it looped. I wasn't shaking anymore, instead, I was frozen solid, just like the car. I felt like I wanted to move, but I couldn't. I was paralyzed, completely helpless as the singular red lights I'd originally seen flashing in the road ahead grew each to be the size of my own car. It traveled smoothly through the air, slicing the dark night sky like butter. It was the size of a house, at least 3 stories tall, with those 2 gleaming red lights shining brightly at its helm, like eyes that were burning into me. I have no idea how long and they, hovered above me. It shook the entire car as it did, and seemed to even manage to drop the already frosted night by 10 degrees or so. I was aware that it was there, just like I was aware I could see my breath and feel the tear flooding from my eyes, but I couldn't move an inch. The darkest of thoughts seemed to shoot through my mind, thoughts of war and death, and they were strong thoughts. It was as if I could smell the corpses and taste the blood. The lights flickered above in sync with the car starting and stalling multiple times without me even moving. The shouts from the radio grew louder and louder. Sierra Echo Echo Sierra Echo Echo. Then, there was darkness. I woke slowly, opening my eyes just as the sunlight trickled in through the bedroom window. Carrie's warm and supple body was tightly pressed against my own, and for a split second the journey didn't even cross my mind. When it came flooding back, it was as if I was frozen once more, my jaw locked and my joints jammed. Everything felt cold. It was like they were still watching. My body released itself and I sucked in air as if I'd never breathed before. Scarier than the event itself was the fact that I could not remember anything after it. I should have still had around 350 miles ahead of me after it happened, but they were nowhere to be found in my mind. I couldn't remember coming off of that hellish road. I couldn't remember arriving at Carrie's. I couldn't remember getting into bed with her. My heart was beating fast as my mind attempted over and over to retrace the steps after the lights. There was nothing. Nothing. It was just pure, blank, black. I could feel sweat dripping from my brow, even despite the low morning temperature. I moved my hand slowly from the small of Carrie's back, still not wanting to wake her if I didn't have to, and pulled it towards my face. I jumped back, shuffling up the bed in a mess of limbs as I attempted to escape my own hand, a hand that was now coated in thick, congealed blood. Why was I bleeding? What had happened? The taste of it somehow returned to my mouth, just as it had under the lights. Carrie! I screamed. She wasn't moving, but I needed her to wake up, I needed her help, I needed her. I leapt forward, gripping her shoulders in my bloodied hands. Still there was nothing. "Carrie," I whispered, knowing full well that there would be no response. The blood wasn't mine. Carrie was gone. I could taste her in my mouth.